everybody, Trevor here. It's been a long time since I made a brand new top 3, hasn't it? Well, quite a while back, I made a top 5 Steam Team members video where I talked about why I liked Thomas, Percy, James, Gordon, and Emily. But I left out certain ones just for the sake of this video. However, that does not mean that I dislike the 3 former Steam Team members, which is the subject of today's video. Oh, and by the way, thank you guys for giving me over 4.7 thousand subscribers. It really helps me a lot. Now, in Big World Big Adventures, the 3 former members, Edward, Henry, and Toby, were replaced by 2 new female engines. Not to say that's a bad thing, but at the same time, Nia and Rebecca could have had some trial and error here and there when it comes to the writing of this era. In fact, the Unlucky Tug explained this better from his perspective on how he would fix seasons 22 to 24. I'll provide a link to that in the description below if you want more information on it. But for this video, I'll be ranking Edward, Henry, and Toby from least underappreciated to most underappreciated. And don't expect the Scotch twins or any of the Great Western engines to be on this list because they don't really count in my opinion. Oh, and Doug was going to be part of the Steam Team, but was dropped in favor of Emily. Yeah, just pointing that out there. But that's not important right now. Let's just get this top 3 video done and over with. Number 3 is Henry. The reason I'm putting Henry as number 3, not because he's the number 3 green engine, but because he had 2 personalities. One old and grumpy like in some stories, and another old, kind, and timid, like in Henry's Forest. And in all honesty, I kind of prefer Henry's Fluttershy-esque side because for one thing, we already have a big grumpy engine named Gordon, as well as a vain engine named James. Secondly, I always like to picture Henry as a kind but timid and shy engine, especially when it comes to his favorite forest in Season 3. And since he now sleeps at Vickerstown Sheds, I would like to see an episode about him and Rosie together and how they easily got along. Coming at number 2 is Edward. Good old Edward. This character was one of the first to be created by the Reverend Wilbur Awdry when he was reading a story about trains for his son Christopher, who had measles at the time. I put Edward as number 2 not because he's number 2 on the Northwestern Railway, but because he, along with Henry, got treated very poorly by the Mattel executives and therefore deserved better. What makes Edward very special is that he's basically the peacemaker when it comes to the Steam Team at Tima's Sheds, and he's also the voice of reason to many engines and would often help them out in a tough situation. For example, when Gordon gets stuck on his hill, it is up to the kind old engine to push him all the way to the top. He was also the mentor to the younger engines including Bill, Ben, and Philip, and would often keep them in order so they don't get into mischief. Speaking of which, why couldn't they bring back Boko in a shed for Edward? Why did they have to have Philip sleep at Wellsworth Sheds? He's the frickin' Knapford pilot for crying out loud. And look, I understand why Edward moved out just to live closer to his branch line, but at the same time, they could have at least made more berths at Tima's Sheds and have it be the same size as the one from the later books in the Railway series. Is that too much to ask? And I can't believe I didn't point this out in the first place like everyone else in the fandom. And the number 1 spot goes to Toby. Ah yes, Toby. Not only is he one of my favorite underrated Thomas characters, but because he was Christopher Awdry's favorite as a child when he and his father rode inside one of the J70s in real life. How lucky was that? But the biggest reason why Toby is number 1 is because he's the most underappreciated when it comes to the Steam Team. For example, he's the only member to sleep outside of Tima's Sheds, and not to mention, he only spoke once in certain seasons. In addition, I like Toby because his old-fashioned looks and kind personality make him so unique. And yes, he does act timid and cowardly at times in the more modern seasons, but who cares at this point? We can't have too many wise engines on Sodor. And to be quite honest, as much as I don't like the idea of Toby having his own branch line in the series, but it would have been nice for Mattel to adapt the Good Old Days fan episode onto television. That way, it would have explained so easily why Toby got his old branch line back in Season 5. But because Mattel is so ignorant about the Thomas fandom, it's very unlikely that this is going to happen. Oh, and one last thing. Did you know that Eddie Glenn returned to the voice cast just to voice Toby in the US dub of All Engines Go? I was actually surprised when I first found out about this on the internet. And not to mention, Toby Haddock, the new UK voice actor for Toby, does a great job too. I'm thankful that Toby's still an adult, unlike some characters. Oh, and I forgot to mention that his old tramway was mentioned in the reboot. How cool is that? That should have been canon to the original series a long time ago. Anyways, tell me your thoughts below on which of these former Steam Team members are your favorite. Do you agree with my list, or do you have your own personal preference? And speaking of Toby, join me next time where I give a mini review on Toby Feels Left Out from Season 9, and why I think it's a great episode. This is Trevor Davis, signing off.